What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you some of my favorite and least favorite things about the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 to help you decide whether or not it's the right phone for you. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So coming in at number 1, my first pro for the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 is that it has NFC. Now if you're coming from a different manufacturer, like a Samsung for example, or maybe just a higher end phone in general, this might not really sound like a big deal, but for some reason when it comes to Motorola, they really don't put NFC in a lot of their mid-range phones like this. So seeing that this phone has NFC is definitely a nice thing. Now in case you don't know what it is, NFC is the main technology behind tap and pay. So if you like to use that feature, which at this point in 2023, I know a lot of people do, then you will need a phone with NFC. And yeah, in this day and age, at least in the US, pretty much every store you're gonna walk into has some kind of tap and pay. So I feel like honestly, every phone should have it at this point. But unfortunately, again, when it comes to Moto G phones specifically, the vast majority of them don't. Even the 5G phones, which with stuff like the Moto G Power 5G for example, I feel like it's really weird because compared to pretty much all its direct competitors, every other phone like that does have NFC. So if you are someone who uses tap and pay, that definitely is something to think about. But again, luckily with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023, this phone again does have NFC, so you won't have to worry about that here. My second pro for the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 is the battery. Now with this phone, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 20-watt fast charging, so definitely a great battery here. With a large battery like this, you can of course expect real good battery life. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger, but you still need to use your phone all day, a phone like this that has a really large battery will be great for that. And down the road, as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, with a phone like this, since it already has way more life per charge than you even need throughout the day, as the battery wears out and the overall life per charge inevitably gets smaller, it's really not going to affect you nearly as quickly as it would with a much smaller battery. So if you're someone who likes to keep one phone for a longer time without having to replace it, then this definitely will be a good thing. And even when it comes to charging speed, I want to say with Moto G phones, typically they don't really have the best fast charging, but with 20-watt fast charging, although it's not quite as good as the Samsung counterpart that has 25-watt fast charging, it definitely will get the job done. So if you are someone who cares about charging speed, then most likely you won't be disappointed here. But keep in mind, to actually use the 20-watt fast charging, you will need a 20-watt charger, which unfortunately this phone doesn't come with. But all the same, when you do get a fast charger, in my experience, the charging speed on this phone is definitely pretty good. My third pro for the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 is the processor. Now, this is probably my favorite thing about this phone, but with this device, we are getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 6 Gen 1 processor. Now, this is a brand new processor. I believe the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 is actually the first phone to have it, and in my experience so far, the performance has been really good. Sure, it's not the fastest phone ever if you compare it to like a flagship phone obviously, but for a mid-range phone, I have had a really good experience, and honestly with pretty much anything I've done on it, it does get the job done. So if you're looking for a phone for normal daily use, if you're doing stuff like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, and even playing some mobile games and stuff like that, but you still don't need flagship performance and you really don't want to spend $1,400 on a phone, then in that case, the Moto G Stylus 5G will be a great choice. Now I ran a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance wise compared to your current device. Because of course, depending on what you're coming from, it may or may not actually be an upgrade. If you're coming from an older but maybe a higher end device, like a Samsung Galaxy S10 for example, then chances are this phone will be a bit of a downgrade. But if you're coming from a typical mid-range phone or maybe even a lower end device, then it will definitely be a different story. But again, in general, in my experience, for what it is, the performance on this phone is really good, and for most people looking for a mid-range device, I do think you will have a good experience here. My fourth pro for the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 is the Stylus. So I'm sure you saw this coming since, after all, as the name implies, this phone does have a stylus. It's kind of its main feature, and despite not being nearly as good as the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra for example, which is not surprising given that phone is like 3 times the price of this one, for more basic stuff like taking handwritten notes and navigating through your display and things like that, it does definitely get the job done. So while again you're probably not going to be doing any kind of real art or anything like that on this phone, for what it's actually made for the more basic activities, I do think it is decently responsive, in fact a bit more responsive than its predecessor. And overall, if you do want a phone that has a stylus, but you don't want to spend a ton of money on it, I do think you will be pretty happy with this. And then my 5th pro for the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 is the storage. Now, before I get into this, I do want to point out this phone in my hand is factory unlocked, and if you get it through a carrier, the storage might be different depending on the carrier. I know Cricket, for example, tends to have a little bit less storage than the factory unlocked version, but even then, I do think the storage will be pretty good. But anyway, for the Moto G Stylus 5G factory unlocked, it will have 256 gigabytes of internal storage with micro SD card expansion too. And then if you get it through a carrier, I believe it will have 128. Although again, keep in mind, depending on the specific carrier, this may be different. I feel like I've heard of Metro offering 256 with their version, but I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head. Just know, if you do for sure want 256 gigabytes, the factory unlocked version definitely does have it, but most carriers are going to have 128 instead. But honestly, either way, for a phone you can get for typically under $400, this phone does have quite a bit of storage. At 256, I feel like for the average user, that's quite a bit more than you're even gonna need. So if you are someone who doesn't want to ever have to worry about running out of space, this phone will be a great choice for you regardless. But even with the carriers that only offer 128, I feel like even that's enough storage for most people. So either way, if you are looking for a phone that has plenty of storage, the Moto G Stylus 5G will be a great choice. But now that we've gone over some of the good things about this phone, let's talk about some potential drawbacks. So my first con for the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 is that compared to its predecessor, it is a bit smaller. Now with this phone, we are getting a 6.6-inch display with a 20:9 aspect ratio, whereas with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022, that phone did have a 6.8-inch display with a 20.5:9 aspect ratio. Now on one hand, by itself, I really don't think a 6.6-inch display is that bad. In fact, for some people, it might even be preferable, because while having a really large 6.8-inch display does have some advantages, especially if you're just going to be on your phone a lot, some people do want something a bit more compact, which with this phone it definitely is. I feel like the bezels are a bit thinner too, so in general, compared to the predecessor, the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 does feel a little bit more sleek and modern. But all the same, if you are someone who prefers to get the largest display you can, you might be disappointed here. My second con for the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 is that when it comes to recording 4K videos, this phone can only do it in the rear camera. Now, to be fair, I am glad to see this phone can even record 4K videos at all, considering that outside of Samsung, it's not a feature a lot of phones in this price range have. That being said though, I feel like if they are going to give this phone 4K video recording, it might as well have it in both the rear and front. But unfortunately, the front is limited to 1080p. So if you're maybe making a vlog or something, and say you're recording lots of selfie videos, but you want to record in that higher resolution, then unfortunately with this phone, unlike something like the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G for example, they can record 4K videos in both the front and rear. Again, when it comes to 4K videos, this phone can only do it in the rear camera, so definitely keep this in mind. In general, it's probably not that big a deal to most people. In fact, a lot of people probably won't even be recording hardly any videos at all, let alone 4K videos. But if you're maybe a content creator, for example, and you're looking for an affordable phone that can record really high quality videos, this is definitely something to consider. My third con for the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 is that it doesn't have wireless charging. Now, this is another thing that probably isn't really that big a deal, but definitely keep in mind this phone, along with I want to say the vast majority of non-flagship phones, does not have wireless charging. So if you're coming from maybe an older but higher end device that does have it, and you're expecting every phone at this point in 2023 to have the feature, which to be fair is a reasonable expectation considering wireless charging has been around for quite a while now, just know that unfortunately with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023, and again most non-flagship phones, it does not have wireless charging. Now my fourth con for the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 is the display technology. Now with this phone, we are getting an IPS LCD, and despite having a nice sharp 1080p resolution and a 120Hz refresh rate, that definitely makes the phone feel a bit more premium in general compared to something like an AMOLED or a Super AMOLED or an OLED. With an IPS LCD, the colors are not going to be quite as rich and vivid, the display isn't quite as bright, and probably most importantly, the viewing angles are definitely not nearly as good. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, or really in any kind of bright area, compared to something like an AMOLED or an OLED, a display like this will be quite a bit harder to see. And I can tell you from experience, honestly, if you're outside in direct sunlight, this display definitely doesn't give you the greatest visibility. So if you are in that kind of situation where you're really just going to be outside a lot, then you will want to keep this in mind. But also keep in mind, aside from this, in normal indoor environments, the display does still look really good. So for what it is, if you are consuming a lot of content, it is still a pretty good choice. And then finally, my fifth con for the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 is the software support. Now, on one hand, luckily this phone does have Android 13, so if you're really just looking for the latest version of Android, maybe you're someone who gets a new phone every year, for example, so you don't really need that much software support anyway, then in that case, this will be perfectly fine. But keep in mind, when it comes to major updates, because Motorola tends to be a little unpredictable. Sure, the Moto G Stylus 4G 2022, and even the Moto G Pure for that matter, those phones did get the update from Android 11 to Android 12, which I was honestly pretty surprised about. But unfortunately, the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 still has Android 12 and not Android 13, despite coming with Android 12. So based on that, I really don't have very high hopes for this phone when it comes to that kind of thing. Whereas with something like Samsung or Google, those phones are getting 4 years of software support. So with like the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G, for example, which I would say is basically Samsung's equivalent to this phone, that phone is going to get Android 14, 15, 16, and 17. So when you compare it to this phone that maybe will eventually get Android 14, but might not even get that, if you are really looking for a phone to keep for multiple years and you do want the latest version of Android the whole time, then I definitely do think you can do better. But those were my pros and cons for the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2023. In general, despite a few drawbacks that honestly are pretty minor for what it is, I do think this is a great phone, and if you're looking for an affordable 5G device that has plenty of storage, really good performance, a great camera setup, a large battery, and features like NFC and a stylus, then I definitely think this phone is worth considering. Now once again, if you do want to learn more about this device, definitely check out the description where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Stylus Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.